we know everything we need to know about the government, we see where they're increasing spending and we see where they're decreasing spending. They're increasing spending across the board except for our veterans, their benefits being slashed. No COLA increase for those on Social Security, that's being slashed, and they completely gutted the military. Everything else got an increase across the board. Federal workers got I believe it was a $30 billion, $15 or $30 billion pay increase, but veterans are now eligible for less medical care than they have been. We know everything we need to know. The solution, win elections. I know we've said it before, we're going to keep saying it all night long. We have a big government philosophy in Washington right now. We win elections with people whose goal is beyond taxes and spending and the border and repeal Obamacare and all these other things that are very important to us. The overarching goal has to be to reduce the size of the government. It has to be the goal. Not to have better government, not to have any of these other things, a reduced government. Because there is no such thing as a good government that is a big government, because in the end, they will crush the freedoms that we do have. And we need a game score, please.
36-46.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All yours.
Okay. I'm going to comment on the game. I know what's happening. It's interesting listening to my three colleagues here, because we are competitors, because it is very evident that we have people in government who just believe that spending is the answer, and part of it goes back to the culture of government as well, where people have allowed our decision-making process to go from the states, and I'm getting towards federalism here, to go from the states where people actually have a touch. When you say we are the government, if I were to ask any one of you on any single issue that you were most interested in, would you get in the plane tomorrow and try to make a difference in Washington, D.C. if you could make any difference in Phoenix, Arizona? See, when the dynamic of government is making it as local as possible, and that's why I think the whole idea of federalism was so important. You can't do that with everything. We do have, we have departments that are federal level departments. Well, I'll give you one example I've already mentioned already: Department of Education. And this gets back to having citizen oversight as well as the oversight of agencies. And quite frankly, as to your point, who's watching them? Well, we need to watch them. If I've talked to young mothers about this several times now, the Department of Education, no one in their right mind flies to Washington, D.C. to petition for their children at the Department of Education. But you know darn well, if you had a chance to influence the way that education was conducted in the state of Arizona, because that's where the decision was taking place, you would go to Phoenix. So this is part of in addition to cutting the spending, having a different culture in Washington, D.C., and actually actually cracking open the Constitution once in a while, finding out what was supposed to be funded by the federal government and what's not. I think we would find a great deal going back to the waste, fraud, and corruption.
Tommy, can I do a quick add-on to that I forgot to mention?
Okay.
Again, just from the Washington, D.C. perspective, because it's like a foreign land as far as how things get done, right? We've been focusing on the budget, and you guys know that the budget hasn't been passed in 3 years, right? And by law, a budget's supposed to be passed. So Congress is obviously failing the American people and just violating the law. But the budget is the only integrated product that the Congress puts out that sort of addresses discretionary spending plus the other programs like strengthening Social Security, Medicare for the future. So that's why it is so important, because it's the only integrated tool that they have. After that, we go into the authorization and the appropriations process. Okay, so that usually happens spring into summer. The intent is to then authorize, which means you have to make sure every dollar spent on whatever program is actually authorized first, and then appropriated by the Appropriations Committee. And that all is supposed to happen by September 30th for the next fiscal year, but it usually doesn't. But that process of authorization and appropriations is only focused on discretionary spending. So you're talking about now a very disjointed subcommittee sort of doing their own thing, funding different agencies and different programs, defense, homeland security, Department of Education, all that stuff. So that next process of how we're spending authorization and appropriations is just as important to have discipline on, and especially if we don't have a budget, then that thing's like the wild, wild west. But as we're kind of reining in that, the authorization and appropriations process is only focusing on discretionary spending. So you've got to, it can be confusing, but there's several different processes that have to happen for Congress to not be failing to do their job, which they are doing right now.
Next question. Yes, sir. Back
behind you, sir. Okay.
What's your position, all four of you, what's your position on term limits at the federal level?
I'm happy to go first.
I'll go first. I support term limits. I live under term limits here in Arizona. We're term limited to 4 terms. I think that's an adequate number. There's pros and cons to term limits. To be quite honest, I probably wouldn't have been in the legislature if there weren't term limits, because 2 of the 3 seats in my legislative district were termed out, and that created 2 vacancies. So obviously I benefited from term limits. The detriment to term limits is that you lose a lot of institutional knowledge, and you have staff and lobbyists with more institutional knowledge, and then they can influence members of the legislature or members of Congress that haven't been around and don't have that institutional knowledge. I'll give you an example. When Tim B was Senate President, he realized that the staff actually knew more and was manipulating and influencing a lot of things that were going on, and Tim fired the entire Senate staff and brought in all new staff. I mean, that was a pretty smart move. So if you're going to do term limits, you need to do it not just on the members of Congress, but you also need to do it on the staff as well to make sure you have that turnover. Other than that, it could be a problem. But I support term limits.
Well, I'll say actually what I said a little bit earlier. Be careful if you ever start out a sentence to where there should be a law. And this is no different. It's once again asking government to do something that the American people have all the power to do what they want. I obviously understand the concept behind it. There are a lot of things I support, but this is one I actually disagree with most conservatives on. The answer is no, I do not. I believe there is only one thing that will save the United States of America, and that's the American people becoming awake and engaged in their government and voting them out. The Founding Fathers put in an amazing government. Every 2 years, we can vote out the entire United States House of Representatives if we choose to do so. And if we do, we're going to be fine, and if we don't, then we've already lost anyway. And we have term limits for president. How's that working out for us right now? I mean, and if we think that for 1 second that Barney Frank is going to get term limited and we're going to get some constitution-loving conservative to replace him, we have another thing coming. It'll be the next corrupt person that corruptly works their way up. I agree it'd be nice to see a lot of those people go under term limits. But as I said, I don't want them to be thrown out because of a law. I want them to be thrown out like so many were in November because the American people said enough's enough.
Next.
Madison, in particular, and the Founding Fathers were interesting when they were discussing the lower house and how we came about to have a House and Senate that looked somewhat like the House of Lords and the House of Commons. And the reason is that they did understand that the 2 chambers would allow those in the lower house to, in their minds, be elected and from their farms in an agrarian society, serve with their community's consent, and then get back to their lives again. And what we've done in this media complex now, and it seems to be accelerating, is we've put forth an overwhelming opportunity for elected officials to be reelected. And what I believe it's done is starting to discourage, this is a very special election, we can all understand that, discourage many people from running when they should be running. One of the things I'd like to do with my candidacy, quite frankly, is to get more people in their 50s who have achieved something in their lives to spend a couple of terms in Congress and get in and get out. As it goes to term limits, I think that they should be studied. I think it's a good point made that the bureaucracies stay, and they are quite frightening, as a matter of fact. I mean, when you consider what elected officials are talking about now, the Obama administration for this health care was talking about these councils or these sinister groups under whose watch was going to make decisions on who is going to get health care and who not. So I think it goes back to understanding that there's fraud, abuse, corruption across the board. One of the ways to assuage that is to take away many of the incentives for people to attempt to make their lives in Washington, D.C., particularly in the House of Congress, a career.
I'll tell you, when I was in D.C., just to go to Frank's point about term limits, having the staff being smarter than the members, I saw a lot of members of Congress in the Senate that had been there for a long time, and their staff was still much smarter than them. And, honestly, in some cases, thank God for their staff. Because, you see all types there, and actually, in some cases, the staff is the voice of sanity that's advising some of these people who've been there a long time. But to the question, I think our founding document in the Constitution is very clear. The House of Representatives is supposed to be the voice of the people. Everybody is up to be hired or fired every 2 years, and that is what the system is supposed to be all about. The Senate was supposed to provide a little bit more stability there with 6 years to be a little bit more, sort of longer looking. And so the design is there, and I agree that if the American people were just engaged and, and executing their responsibility and their absolute right, which is to get engaged, get involved, and fire people when they're no longer representing them, then that would take care of this whole issue. So I don't think anyone should be spending a career in Congress, but I think the way to address it is not by having a law, to put a limit on them, but to actually have the American people be awakened and engaged and to be voting people out of office that need to be voted out.
If I could just add on real quick on my side. In Arizona, you only pay your legislature $24 grand a year. You can't afford to be just a state legislator. You can make a career out of being a congressman. If you want to really get around the term limit issue and encourage them to spend less time in Washington, cut their pay back to $25,000 a year. And they will spend much more time, like I do, back in the district working to feed my wife and kids, because I can't feed them on what I get paid up in Phoenix. And we are in a hurry right now to get out of Phoenix as fast as we can so we can all get back to our jobs and our lives back in the private sector. That's the problem. If as Mr. Sitton had alluded to, when you were in the Congress when the country first started out, you couldn't survive being in Congress. They were only there for a short period of time. They got up there, did what they had to do, and they got home. They have businesses to run, farms to work, families to attend to, and we've lost that now. We have members of Congress that have moved their entire families to D.C., don't even live in their districts anymore, don't have any connection other than they fly back during the election cycle. That's the problem. So you have to have one way or the other to control that. If you're not going to do it with term limits, then you need to find a way to have them only up there like we are 100 days out of the year, and you don't pay them enough because they don't want to make a career out of it because they'd go broke if they did. So.
Our chairman has a pressing question. I don't know what it is, but
I just have a
we'll
question.
let him ask it.
Well, I just know that the American dream is now the American nightmare. And you touched on this a little bit. People were getting loans that couldn't really afford them, and a lot of those homes where they couldn't afford the payments, they were already through the system. But the problem now is that the system is totally upside down. And the federal government gave trillions of dollars to the banks that was supposed to trickle down to the people to help save everything, and it didn't happen. What happened was the banks are now, that were in serious trouble, they're now wealthier than they've ever been. The big banks bought out the little banks, and the little banks are no longer in business. You have the huge banks that are back with the old money. You have homeowners and you have people now that are struggling because, for example, a house right next to mine sold for $200,000 less than I paid for my house. It was a foreclosure. So I went to try to refinance the house. Interest rates are lower than they've ever been. I could lower my payment significantly. I cannot, and this is just me, but I cannot refinance my house because I'd have to come up with $150,000 in cash to do it. So I'm stuck. If I had to move or leave town, if I had to change to a different city, I'd have to give the keys to the bank. I couldn't sell the house because I'd owe more than it's worth. And this is the problem not here. This is the problem all over America. The appraisers are appraising houses and the banks are lending now with low interest rates, yes, but you can't, only a new person going in for a loan can take advantage of that, not somebody that's already in a home, that's been in a home for a long time. So my question is, with all of that background, what would you do, or what could be done to help the American dream, to bring people back so that people that are in trouble aren't stuck, that would not lose their homes, so that we can get things back. And this was one of the main things that did cause our recession and our depression, really. And most people, we realize it, but we kind of forget it.
Well, let's go through it. Why did we have this housing bubble? Why did we have the housing crisis? It was the federal government. 1977, the Community Reinvestment Act was passed. It was then beefed up several times under several different presidents and several different administrations. And to ridiculously simplify the thing, the reason so many loans were given to people that could not afford those loans, the reason everybody was offered a loan they couldn't afford to pay back is not because bankers were any different than any other part of our society. It's because when a banker is offering that loan to someone who can't pay it back, they were assured that there was a federal government taxpayer-funded check standing behind that loan officer as he made the offer. Because banks are like any other business, and they're not in the business of losing money. They're in the business of making money. Therefore, they never make that offer to somebody who can't pay it back without a taxpayer backing behind it. And so after 30-plus years of building up a bubble, and a massive bubble, and a massive bubble, and sooner or later the bubble bursts. And sooner or later, I'm in the same boat you are, as is half of the people in the state of Arizona. Half of the homes owe more than they're worth in the
It's
state.
the whole country, it's not just the state.
Well, our state's been hit harder than others, but yes, there's absolutely a massive problem. And what we've done, what the all-knowing federal government has done on top of bailing out the banks, actually, let's talk about that for a moment. Right before our financial crisis, right about half of the cash held in this country was held by the big banks. That means small community banks where you get real customer service, other things, held the other half. Now, after all these glorious things that were supposed to help banks and help the American people, now over 77% of the holdings are with big banks. That's because the big banks were too big to fail and the small banks were too little to care about, as the old saying goes. And that's been the same across every industry, auto and otherwise. The big ones who align themselves with the government, big pharma, all these other things, they were bailed out or given breaks of various kinds. And the smaller ones, the little guy, meaning you and I, we were the ones left holding the bill. And so the answer is to how do we get back the American dream? The truth of the matter is we need jobs, and we need them fast, and we need a lot of them. When we hear the words like we had 1.7% economic growth last year, that's just flat out not good enough. And I know this sounds like a big, lofty number. The truth is that number better get closer to 8, 9, 10 in a single year in order to pay off what we have. But again, the good news is we have the resources to do that. We have everything we need to do that. Are we going to win enough elections to do so? How do we get back the American dream? Get the government out of the way and let the American people do what they've always done. Find a way to better their lives. And one person finding a way to better their lives, and another person finding a way to better theirs, and another one finding a way to better theirs, will all come together and do the exact same thing that economic freedom and free markets have always done. Offer higher quality products at a lower price and a standard of living that the rest of the world marvels at. The only way we will get back your American dream, which is not everybody owning a house. The American dream is knowing that you can be anything at any time. There is nothing you can't achieve in this country because this is America. Other countries, you have a ceiling, and oftentimes it's very low. Not in this country. There's no caste system. There's no royalty. Over 92% of the millionaires in the United States of America grew up middle class or below. That's because you can be anything you want to be in this country, because the government won't get in your way. At least they used to not.
Okay, Dave, in rotation.
Part of the answer is interesting to me because there's an obit going around the internet. You may have seen it once or twice, written by an interesting man from Britain. It's an obituary to common sense, which has been slain. And when you start seeking answers in the complex issues, you always try to go back and reduce it to what makes the most sense. One of the issues, one of the most important bits of common sense, of a rule, because I understand that our folks in Washington, D.C. never went to 6th grade apparently because they don't understand laws of supply and demand as it going to gasoline, but here's the rule that you know. All debts are paid. And we went through a housing bubble when people were perfectly happy to say, well, if I don't pay it, somebody else will. There was a wonderful holiday message that used to come out here all the time. It was called Shoplifters Take Everybody's Money. And kids in high school didn't understand what you're talking about. They said, what do you mean? It means that we all pay higher prices because somebody's taking what doesn't belong to them. So you get back into the housing bubble and all the money that was transacted when it should never have been transacted because people couldn't qualify for the loans, but people were perfectly happy to make their commissions. The deregulation came off on a business that, quite frankly, if you're going to use federally guaranteed money, there was a reason why that it should have been low-risk loans. That's why we have the FDIC and people like that, and we let that just get completely out. Meanwhile, you probably remember people like this, is that during that period of time, we kind of lost our way a little bit because I had a lot of friends who were buying brand new boats and third and fourth homes based on the equity they built up in their houses. And that wasn't a very smart idea either. Because the whole idea of your home in the old days was to buy it, live in it, and then sell it when you're done, because that was the value of a home. It wasn't an investment where you're gonna try to triple your money in the next 3 or 4 years, buy a boat, and move to Hawaii. So you start taking a look at the fact that the government got into a habit of us reassigning risk, reassigning debt, and that's what they do. That's what Congress does, and the whole thing fell apart. To answer your question, I get back, a little discipline again.
Yeah, but that really didn't answer the question.
Okay.
The question was, that's all water under the bridge, that's what happened. What can we do for the homeowners like me, like Jesse, that are stuck where the house is now worth so much less just because of what the appraisers did? You can't refinance, you can't sell. If you have to move, you're gonna be forced to foreclose. So what can be done to help the little guy now? We know what happened. I was asking, what can we do to help the homeowner now that's stuck? He's making his payments, but he's still stuck because he cannot refinance, he cannot sell, he cannot move. And that causes, if I have to move, it causes my house to go into foreclosure. It causes the house next door to do the same thing, where the person can't afford it. And it's an endless cycle where the housing market is stuck and everybody is basically stuck. And that's what I was saying. What can we do to break the cycle and cause it to get better?
Sally?
Dave, you don't want to answer that first?
Well, one of the things the economists will tell you this is called a correction. And so with the correction, we're going to have to decide if we're going to let the market make the correction so that the values of each of the homes return because of demand, which would be one reason that we would try to stimulate our economy again. What would immediately take care of your problem is if we were in a growth mode in this area again, there was a demand for housing and a demand for your house. And now the American system would take care of it, not another federal program.
Right.
So anything that we can do to stimulate our economy and our free enterprise system is actually the best way out of this course correction.
Yeah, I consider the American dream is freedom, opportunity, and personal responsibility, right? And so we've got to go back to those foundations when we're dealing with all of these challenges. I mean, we are in a tough situation. I mean, I bought land in Elgin in 2006, right? Oh, I've been climbing, and guess what? It was right before it all fell. So, you know, I'm upside down on that as well. I've had friends and family members who have had to foreclose on their house because of this situation. And, you know, the government's been bailing out, I know we feel the frustration, the government's been bailing out all the big businesses and the big companies, but they're not bailing out the little guy. So, you know, in your heart you want to say, oh, let's go and do that. But as a conservative, I'd say that's not the solution. We cannot have the federal government trying to fix this problem because it's only going to further us into more debt, it's more taxpayers' money, and so that's not the way to fix it. So the way to fix it is to get the economy growing again by focusing on freedom, opportunity, and personal responsibility. I mean, even though we had these scenarios of the loans being offered that were like much more than people could afford, it kind of goes back to the individual responsibility too. I mean, I know what I can afford and what I can't afford. And when you buy a house, how many of you guys own a house here? When you bought your first house, I mean, that was kind of a scary decision you went through, right? Because you knew there was some risk involved in it. And you had to make a calculated assessment as to, you know, whether you could afford this within your income and what what it looked like for the future. So these are serious decisions that we need to be responsible for, and the way to turn this around is not to have the federal government trying to bail everybody out, as popular as that may feel, but to actually grow the economy by get the federal government out of the way, get our debt under control, and get the economy going by entrepreneurial spirit, innovation, and you know, just the freedom of the free market economy, and that will then get us in the right direction. So the housing values will go up, and people can now, you know, be able to get no longer be upside down. So it's not a popular answer. It doesn't make you feel good, but I think it's the right way to go to be fiscally disciplined and to go back to those real principles of the American dream of freedom, opportunity, and personal responsibility.
Thanks, Sally. Frank?
Yeah, no matter how hard you try to mess with it, the free market will always prevail. And that's always been the problem. We created artificial demand in the housing market by giving people money that could not afford to pay back their homes. I mean, I had a guy that I worked with that, and I am so glad I didn't buy that $600,000 house right now. But I have a couple buddies that did, one of which he did a variable rate 5-year, because the real estate agent told him that the way houses were going up, in 5 years, you can refi, you'll have all this equity in your home, and you can refi and all this stuff. And then some guys did 2 loans. They got a variable rate loan. It was a disaster. When I built my first house, and I was the general contractor for my first home. I built my first house. And I saved my money because my dad built his first house. He saved his money, and my grandfather built his first house because he saved his money. And we were just too cheap to pay some builder a lot of money to do something that we could do ourselves. And we had all that equity built in from the get-go. It was the smartest thing I ever did. Now, it sucked, and it was a nightmare dealing with all those contractors. But I knew that I had to do that. Sorry about that. I had to do that because that's what was best for me and my family. People all of a sudden now wanted to take shortcuts. They wanted everything's get rich quick or get the biggest house, keep up with the Joneses. We got to do this. And we created this consumerism in this country where everybody was instead of thinking about what was best for your wife and kids, it was all about, well, I can't buy a $200,000 house because Bob bought a $400,000 house and Steve's got a $600,000 house. And this was the garbage that we've been fed. So you've got to get back to the individual responsibility. And it stinks right now that there are so many people upside down. But we created this artificial balloon, this artificial demand, and now we have an overabundance of supply. And free market kicks in. When you have a lot of houses that are empty and vacant, guess what happens to the price of houses? They drop. You've got to fix it with growth. And the way you fix it is you create jobs like Jesse had mentioned about North Dakota. They can't build enough houses up there because they've got all this job creation going on. They got people flocking in North Dakota that are looking for work, and they can't build enough houses to keep up with the demand. The price of housing in North Dakota is going through the roof right now. They don't have that problem. So we have it right here. We have all the resources, even here in Arizona. Marshall Vest over at the U of A said he predicted it would be 7 to 12 years before we got rid of the oversupply of housing in the state of Arizona, unless we did something dramatic to generate and create jobs in Arizona. Between our timber industry, which the federal government won't let us cut trees down, between our mining industry, where they won't let us dig any more holes in the ground, we have uranium that can generate tons of revenue for the state of Arizona. We've got a bunch of other things. We've got the biosciences. We've got so many things here, and everything is stopped by one big bureaucracy at the federal level. And they have got us between a rock and a hard place. They have destroyed our economy by sticking their nose in our business, and then they won't let us dig our way out because the bureaucrats always stick their nose in our business and won't do it. So we're damned if we do, and we're damned if we don't. So you got to get somebody up there that puts these guys out of business, and you shrink that government down to where all these guys can't stick their nose in your business anymore.
Thank you. All right. Go ahead.
Just one quick answer from each of you. What one attribute do you as a person have that will help you beat your Democratic opponent in June?
Dave's up.
Martha's article is Dave's up.
Give it to me, I'm giving you time to think.
I'm working it. It's a great theatrical move. I appreciate it. It's all good. I think trust. I've been in this community for 38 years. I've been involved with so many groups from the military, and I have great respect for my 3 competitors here because they've served. I did not, but I've been in DM-50 and Honor Flight and honorary of the 55th Rescue Squadron. I've been on off that base and other bases my entire adult life. And I've got the Tucson Pops Orchestra, so I go from fine arts to military and they're just about everything in between.
I would say leadership. I've had a career of 26 years in uniform, almost 2 years serving afterwards as a professor. I've got demonstrated leadership, command in combat, serving as a colonel, standing up for what's right. The education to be able to look at issues from all sides and then lead, which sometimes means making very difficult decisions. It also means inspiring people and building a team together that's inspired and ready to move forward. I mean, you have to do that when you're in command. And so I have that demonstrated record of leadership. I think there is a vacuum of leadership in Washington, D.C., and I think the American people are looking for leadership. The people of Southern Arizona are looking for leadership, and that's what I'm going to bring to this constituency for the whole district. when you lead, you can't be divisive, you can't be inflammatory, you have to know your stuff. You have to be able to communicate well, and you have to bring people together and look them in the eye even when you disagree and say, this is why we're going to go in this direction, and I love you anyway, but we're going to move on, and you can trust me. And that's what leadership is, and I've proven that over my 28 years as a public servant. And I raised my right hand to support and defend the Constitution, and that takes leadership to do that at the levels I've been in the military, and we can continue to bring that to Southern Arizona.
Results. Mr. Barber is going to sell hope, and he's going to sell promises. He's going to sell the same garbage that the Democratic Party and the left has been selling this state and this country, and it's gotten us into a disaster. You've got to send somebody that can cut up the credit cards, stop the spending, reduce the size of government, and deliver on those commitments. I mean, we did it here in Arizona. I ran on that. That was my platform when I ran for the Senate. People knew. I told everybody, you elect me, I'm going to Phoenix to cut spending and reduce the size of government and balance the budget. They knew what was going to happen when they elected me. And that's the first thing we did when we went up there. We got those results. Now, I'm not going to promise everybody. If you want somebody to bring home the bacon, I'm not your guy. I'm not going up there to get pork projects and bring home all this garbage. I'm going up there to save this country from itself. And you've got to do that. We have an administration here that just loves spending money they didn't have. We have an administration there that loves spending money that they don't have. You got a Congress of both parties that hasn't had the political courage to do what they need to save this country from its own financial self-destruction. And you got to send somebody that can deliver those results. And time again, there's only one guy that's actually been able to go and show that he's got the courage to make those tough votes and then take the political fallout and all the shots and the jibes and the criticism from everybody for making those hard choices. And that's what you need up there, somebody that can deliver those results.
The best team. Those of you who saw the race we ran last time came within 4,000 votes of beating somebody who was supposedly unbeatable. Drive around town, you see the signs, you see the grassroots race we run. It's not me. We have the best team around. They know what they're doing. They work harder than anybody else. And they're the reason why we have the best team in Southern Arizona of any party.
Okay, any first-timers? Yes, sir.
Should the federal government be involved at all in the student loan?
And what was that? The student loan program?
Yeah, thanks. It is my turn now, Dave. It's not your turn.
Thank you,
I think some of the challenges we have with the student loan program, because I think education obviously is important. We want to make sure that we're educating our next generation, because that is our prosperity and that is our future. But some of the dynamics you see is that the more loans that the students are able to get, then the higher the tuition goes, because the universities are now trying to, they're able to raise their fees in order to address those loans. So we've got to get a handle on that and actually get that under control. You got kids who are going to college now, and then they're in debt for the next 30 years of their lives just to get an education. So I think we need to be focusing on bringing the cost of education down. This is not a federal government responsibility. I think the federal government needs to stay to the max extent possible out of the business of education, because it is a state and local issue that is best done when there's competition, when there's reward for excellence, and when parents are involved, and we can actually spur institutions on for excellence that have to compete with each other, when the best teachers and professors are actually rewarded as opposed to being able to be tenured and just sit on their cushy job. I mean, this is a little bit of the primary and secondary and university education. It's the whole integrated piece there. My mom was an educator. She served as an educator until she retired last year at the age of 77. So I've gotten an earful my whole life about the good and the bad things about the federal government's involvement in education. I've personally benefited from a good education, obviously, with my Air Force Academy degree and then 2 master's degrees. So I'm very passionate about education, but I think right now what we've got going on is loans are getting larger and larger, and then the universities are charging more and more, and so then education becomes more and more unaffordable for those who can't qualify for the loans. So we got to take a look at the most local level how to bring that cost down and make it affordable and available, so that we can actually make sure we've got the best and brightest future for our nation. Right now we are number 23 in the world in math and number 31 in science, and we're America. I mean, I believe in American exceptionalism, and our quality education is our future. So we have got to make sure that we've got better education. I want to know your opinion on the particular issue with the loans, though.
Well, I believe Finland's number one as far as their educational
Yeah.
system.
Yeah.
Great. I don't know how they do it, but if it was me, I'd do whatever they're doing.
Yeah, well, I don't think we want to go in that direction, because again, a lot of what those countries, the Nordic countries do is, are you ready to pay 50% taxes? Are you ready to pay, 19 to 25% on everything you purchase when you go to the store? So I don't think the solution is to go, towards socialized education, socialized, medicine, all that kind of stuff. That's not the direction to go in. But there are ways for us to spur on excellence and reward excellence and actually make sure our education is a priority because it is our future. And I'd be happy to hear from anybody else on this issue as well, but I'll hand over to Frank.
No, federal government shouldn't be in the student loan business. Again, if you had a free market approach, I'll give you an example. If you got two kids, one wants to go and become an MD and the other one wants a liberal arts degree, and they're going to go, the tuition's pretty much, with the exception of the kid that wants a med degree, has got to go for some additional years in med school. But if they're both going for an undergrad degree, if you were to go to get a loan from a bank, the bank would say, okay, which one of these guys is going to have the economic benefit? Which one of these guys is going to be able to pay back the loan? Which one of these guys? Now, the federal government doesn't do that. They just give them all the money that they want because they're going to run right to the university and they're going to pay the tuition rate. And then and I talked with, when Dr. Shelton was the dean over here at the U of A, he actually said he thought it was criminal what we were doing to kids by giving them these big loans and then watching them go out the door with a degree that really had no economic benefit, and they were saddled with all this debt. He said it was wrong. And everybody believed they have this right to go to college, right to do this, right. And what they were doing was they were sending these kids out in the world that would be paying their college loan back for 30 or 40 years in some cases, for a degree that just really didn't have the economic benefit. David Stevens is a state representative from Sierra Vista. His son went to a technical school in Phoenix. I can't remember the name. It was like ATI or something. It was an automotive school. It was 11 months training program. The kid came out, and he's making $45,000 a year fixing cars. And yet, you could talk to somebody that'll pay $75,000 to get a degree over here at the U of A in social work, and they can't find a job for $25K when they get out. And that's the problem. If you let the free market go, I've talked to teachers in schools that say, oh, what's your mission? My mission is so that every kid in my class goes to college. That's not the mission of the public school system. Public school system is to create economically viable people that leave the public school system. If they want to go to start their own business or go into the job and get a skilled job, or they want to go in the military, they want to go to college, they've got to be prepared to go do all that. And we've created this mindset that you have to go to college. Now, nobody's saying that college doesn't help you get better opportunities economically. It does. But there are other alternatives. I got a guy that came to my house, and he's a contractor. That guy makes more money in 1 year as a contractor than I bet you a lot of these docs over at the University Medical Center. He's a business guy.
Daggone right.
Contractor. So you can't create this mindset that everybody's entitled to college. Therefore, the government